So it kind of started a long time ago. It started when, when we got married, her parents said at our wedding, they're so happy she met someone who believes the exact same thing she does. And it hit me like a ton of bricks because I'm like, great, now everyone thinks something about me that's not true. So I feel like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that's kind of what set me on a path of destruction. I was going through a very angry atheist phase where I was, ridiculing her beliefs and everybody's beliefs around me. And I was more mad at myself than anyone else for duping people into thinking I was something I wasn't, which is why it's important to be your authentic self if you're able to, because, pretending to be something you're not is just going to build up inside you and eventually you're going to explode. So part of what my book is trying to tell you is just be yourself, because, pretending to be something you're not is harmful.
Welcome to the Podcast for Inquiry, brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, a national educational charity supporting your community for reason, compassion, and secular humanist values. You have answers, we have questions. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood, board member and secular chair for CFIC. Welcome. My guest today on Podcast for Inquiry is Steve Ghikadis. Steve is a humanist officiant who conducts secular marriages, memorials, and other life-affirming celebrations. Raised as a freethinker, Steve has been married to a Christian for over a decade. Steve serves as an ambassador for Humanist Canada, Recovering from Religion, and Sunday Assembly. I speak with Steve about his book, Humanism from the Heart. We discuss the many themes and ideas in his book, including why Steve tried to become a believer many times throughout his life, purpose, meaning, and destiny, what soft determinism means, the dynamics of a family with one Christian and one humanist parent, the value of the answer, I don't know, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Steve Ghikadis as much as I did on today's Podcast for Inquiry. Steve Ghikadis, welcome back to Podcast for Inquiry.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back.
Yeah, you're the third guest to come back in 4 years. This is our final episode of 2025, and I think it's a great topic to close out the year on, because we're going to talk about your first book, Humanism from the Heart, and then you've got a subtitle, Building Bridges Beyond Belief. So let's start with the title. Tell me a little bit about your book and why you decided to call it Humanism from the Heart.
Sure. Well, it's a bit of a long story, so I'll try and shorten it. But I was writing a blog on Medium for Excommunications, which is the Recovering from Religion blog. And I wrote a couple stories about kind of things that have happened in my life where I've had to interact with people with different backgrounds and beliefs, and how I was able to bridge the gaps and things like that. So people were like, oh, this is kind of a cool idea. Do you think you would want to put all these together into like a book? So I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So I compiled them all. And then a friend of mine who I didn't know who she was because she was under a pen name, she reached out to me and she said, I hear you're doing a book and I'm actually an author and I would like to edit it for you for free. I'm like, okay, sure. I can't argue with free. So, she took all the stories and she read them and she goes, okay, well, this is no good. I'm like, oh, it was very disheartening to hear that. And I was like, okay, well, she goes, well, like there's a lot of heart here. There's a lot of humor here, but you just don't have a unifying message that's tying everything together. Mm-hmm. So she's like, it's back to the drawing board. So I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this then. It was just kind of a spur of the moment thing. I don't really care. So I let it go for a few months. And then I was doing a podcast for Humanist Canada, which is called The Voice of Canadian Humanism. And I ended up doing a segment, and they wanted the segment to be called something else. So I was like, okay, well, it's kind of from the heart. So maybe Humanism from the Heart. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's a really good title for the book that I want to write. So I'm like, never mind, I'm going to take this name, and then I put that down on paper, and I'm like, what's the overall, key message to this book? It's kind of, building bridges and it's beyond belief. Okay, perfect. Right there. The alliteration works. So I put the title together, and then after that, it was like pen to paper. Everything went really well. I gave it back to the editor, and she was like, yeah, you nailed it. This is something that's worth putting out there. So I'm like, okay, awesome. So.
Yeah, well, when I read "Building Bridges Beyond Belief," like the subtitle of the book, it reminded me of one of my favorite books from when I was about, oh, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old, because every word in the book up until the last page started with a B. So like the
Oh.
first page was big, and then big brown bear, and then it just went on, and it was
Hmm.
completely ridiculous. But it was so much fun. It was like big brown bear, blue bull, beautiful baboon, biking backwards, broke.
That's awesome.
They bumped the black bugs banana boxes, and it was all, and I was like, how, and I kept turning the page, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I was hoping that your book would start, every chapter would be starting with a single letter, but
I should have
alas,
done
that's
that.
not that's not what I found. But what I did find was that, despite the fact that it wasn't as alliterative inside the book as on the cover, I thought that the title was quite honest, in that you don't make an intellectual or a logical case for humanism with it in your book, but instead, it seemed to me as a reader, what you were doing is like, this is life as a humanist. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to convince you that it's an accurate worldview, or even that you need to be a humanist, but you were trying to convey, it seemed to me, that this is what life is like, living life through a humanist through a humanist lens and with a humanist philosophy. And it's far more about your feelings, your emotions, your reactions, your thoughts, but usually your thoughts in terms of reactions to things, rather than a detached, objective perspective on things. And I'm wondering, was that your intent? Did I get what you wanted to convey as part of your book? Or am I, as a reader, way off from your authorial intent?
So you're actually the first person that's picked that up. Because that's exactly what I was going for. And it's funny because I have a lot of people, on both sides of the divide, religious people that are like, oh, you're just trying to push atheism, you're trying to push humanism. And then I have people that are on the atheist side going, oh, you're not being harsh enough. You need to tell religious people that they're stupid and that kind of thing. Right. And it's like, it's the happy medium. It's like just showing that, it doesn't matter what your background and beliefs are. The best part about living life is trying to be empathetic, trying to be compassionate towards other people, and just basically the principles of humanism. And that's what I'm trying to just convey, that, if you live your life as a humanist, this is what you can accomplish.
Yeah, and there were lots of, I mean, it was uh, essentially a collection of anecdotes of different periods of your life. And I want to ask about a few of the stories that you told. But towards the beginning, you wrote something that I found curious, and I want you to expand on it, because you didn't expand on it in the book. So you wrote that I'll just quote you, and you wrote, "I had tried to find a way to believe many times, to no effect."
Mm-hmm.
And so there's two things that come from that. One is that I'm assuming that you basically never believed in a deity. It was just something that never quite that came to you, and that's fine. But you wanted to believe. You tried many times. You write, and I'd like to know why. What prompted to you? What was the source of your desire to believe?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I had a lot of people in my life, early influences that were religious in one aspect or another. I had a lot of people who were Christian. I had some people who were Hindu. And I had even an Asian family up the road that was, I don't even know what their religion was, because I couldn't really understand what they were saying when they were doing it. They had me over because their son and I became really good friends. And they served us dinner one time, and they pulled they had like the little cloches on the food, and they pulled it up, and it was just a fish head with like eyes, and I'm like, oh, I can't even eat it. But they had like this ritual before their meal, and I'm like, I don't even understand this, but this is really cool. And it's just the things that I saw throughout the years. I'm like, it would be really cool to belong to some type of group where you can actually like go, oh, like we all know why we're doing this, and we all understand the same thing, and there's someone looking out for us, and that type of thing. But like you said, I never really believed it. I was baptized Anglican, but I was raised as a freethinker. I was never told I had to believe certain things. I was never told I had to pray or anything. And in the book, I even say, I went out and said, Zeus, if you're real, hit me with lightning, right? I was just curious to see if there was anything out there.
Oh, come
And,
on!
and
If you were in fact hit by lightning, Would that prove the existence of Zeus or any number of other gods? I mean,
Right?
like,
Yeah. But I was 9 years old or
I
10
know
years
you
old. So.
disproved your atheism, but it wouldn't give you a dispositive proof of to which deity of that struck you down. Come
Yeah.
on, Steve, do
I
better.
know. I know. But I guess if I'm asking directly to that deity, right?
Oh,
Um,
I see. It was
yeah.
a direct challenge.
Direct challenge. Yeah.
You
But
should go to the base of Olympus next time.
exactly, exactly. Well, I have Greek heritage, and that's kind of why I was going down the Greek
Ah,
mythology route. Just experimenting different things. I even at one point thought the ancient alien theory was correct. I just thought like, oh, that's a really interesting thing, and that makes more sense than like the Bible or something like
and
that.
what is the ancient alien theory for those that might not be familiar with it?
It was like the Anunnaki. It was like the group of aliens that came down and seeded Earth and that type of thing. But then it just kind of asks more questions than it answers, really, when you think about it.
Is
So
that is that the same thing as panspermia, which is like as far as I know, it's a scientific theory that just says life evolved somewhere, and like on a meteorite, some bacteria or very small aspects of life crash landed on Earth at some point in its development, and that's why there's life here, or why there might be life in many places in the cosmos.
yeah, it was a different theory. It was the Zachariah Sitchin guy. He wrote the book Chariots of the Gods, and
Oh,
yeah,
I've heard of
he
that.
claimed
I've
that
not
it
read
was
it.
like okay, yeah, he claimed there was like this planet Nibiru is like the ninth planet or something, and it came in between, um, I don't know, Mars and Jupiter or something, and then they were able to get to Earth and then seed Earth. It was a really weird theory, but at the time I'm like, oh, that actually makes sense because it could actually happen within the confines of reality as opposed
Right.
to the supernatural. But then it just you ask more questions like, well, where did they come from and that type of thing, right? So just yeah. But yeah, lots of things along the way. And, when I met my wife and also as a promise to my grandfather, at the same time I was meeting my wife, I had joined the Masonic Lodge. And the Masonic Lodge is a very like religious institution and they don't really come across that way, but they say you have to believe in some type of deity or some type of higher power. So I'm like, I guess when I walk under power lines, I guess I can say that there's a higher power than me, you know? But I got in, and then became very like Christian. So like they put a bag on your head, they put you down at this altar, and they say, who do you put your trust in? And they say, in God. And then I'm like, in God? Question mark. And they're like, yay. And all the stories and all the things that as you're going up the levels, it's all biblical stories. So it was kind of a cool way for me to learn about the Bible. But it's like seeing the joy that everybody had. I'm like, oh yeah, I wish I could believe like them, and even my wife's family and everything. Um, I said, I was thinking to myself, I wish I could believe like them, just because they seem happy. And I did cut out quite a bit from the intro of the book because my wife and I, she's still a believer. She's a Christian. So there's some things I had in the first few chapters of the book, or the first introduction of the book, that she wasn't comfortable with. So I
Hmm.
did have to shorten some of those areas. So some of the areas where you may find that there's some missing information, it's because I did had to cut it short, just because she didn't want that out there, on paper,
Right.
in front of a giant, worldwide audience. So.
Well, because your book is selling millions, I'm sure.
I wish that would be nice. I did keep the cost really low because I'm trying to get the message out there. It's not really about making money on it. And I do make it for the Kindle ebook. I make it free every 3 months, because every 3 months they let you do a promotion where you can make it free for a week. So I try and do that. The next one's going to be December 19th, and then it'll be 3 months from then that it'll be free again.
Right. Well, you just mentioned something that I want to delve into a little bit deeper, and that is, uh, as you're as a humanist yourself, and a believer in no deities, and that if things are going to get better, it's going to be because of what we collectively do as a species.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you seem very happily married to someone with a very, very, very different worldview. And usually, when I know there's the old phrase, opposites attract, but I have found that that's not true in practice in most
Yeah.
cases, or at least they may attract, but they don't last.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't seem to be the case with you, uh, and and you've got two, at least from the way you describe them in your book, very vivacious, beautiful boys,
Mm-hmm.
and frequently religion is a major topic when it comes to parenting, and having very different views on the existence of God, and the value of religion as it is incorporated into one's life, is a potential source of major tension in a relationship and between two parents. And I'm hoping that you can expand a little bit on how your family avoids those potential tensions from evolving into disputes and fights?
Yeah, so it kind of started a long time ago. It started when when we got married. Her parents said at our wedding, they're so happy she met someone who believes the exact same thing she does, and it hit me like a ton of bricks because I'm like, great, now everyone thinks something about me that's not true, so I feel like a wolf in sheep's clothing, and that's kind of what set me on a path of destruction. I was going through a very angry atheist phase where I was, ridiculing her beliefs and everybody's beliefs around me. And I was more mad at myself than anyone else for duping people into thinking I was something I wasn't, which is why it's important to be your authentic self if you're able to, because, pretending to be something you're not is just going to build up inside you and eventually you're going to explode. So part of what my book is trying to tell you too is just be yourself, because, pretending to be something you're not is harmful. So at one point I started looking for ways that I could have more cordial conversations and not burn bridges every time I open my mouth. So I discovered Anthony Magnabosco, who does street epistemology. And he actually wrote the foreword to my book. And actually my copy of my book has his signature in it because I met him at NanoCon, which was really cool.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So, but I watched all his videos, tried to practice, street epistemology, do the Socratic questioning method with a lot of my friends and family. And I also stumbled across Dale McGowan, who had written books on interfaith family, and parenting and that type of thing. And I just applied all the principles that they had put forth in their books. And I also had reached out to them personally, and I'd been talking to them for about 2 or 3 years before I actually got to the point where I was comfortable enough to have full-on conversations about religion and it not be harmful conversations. I was able to develop a common understanding, or a mutual understanding between me and my wife about where we're coming from. And I think I even mentioned it in the book that we agree on like 99% of things. We just disagree on the smallest thing ever, which is where did the universe come from? Because nobody knows for sure. So there's no point
I
in
mean,
arguing over it.
that might be the smallest thing for you, but that's it, for many people. That is actually one of the most important things, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
just. I mean, if we're talking about a Christian, I mean, and your wife is Christian, so I'm going to talk about Christianity here. If we're talking
Right.
about Christian beliefs and a Christian worldview, it's not just about whether the Big Bang was uncaused or whether God created the universe in 7 days. There's a whole way of life. There's a morality that is defined by Christianity, and not every Christian adheres to every Christian belief, and there are lots of. I mean, that's one of the reasons why there are so many different
Yeah.
sects of Christianity.
45,000 different denominations. Yeah.
Uh, uh, but but it's a little bit more than just how did the universe start. And so, could you give a little bit of practical insight? Like, where are some of the things that your view of the universe and your wife's view of the universe might differ, and how you bridge that gap? I mean, you've
Yeah.
mentioned the process that you went through in order to be able to engage in those conversations. I'd
Mhm.
like a little bit. Let's take that to uh, the next level of granularity. And how did you apply it? How do you and your wife bridge those differences? How do you and your wife raise your kids when you might have a difference of opinion that is based that stems from your very different worldviews and philosophies?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just going to preface this by saying it's not going to work for everybody, and that everybody is going to have
No,
differences.
I'm
Yeah.
asking what
Yeah. Yeah.
worked for
For
you,
sure.
right? And
Yeah.
other people have different relationships. They're not you, and
Yeah, exactly. Hmm.
they have deep relationships with people that are not your wife, or at least I sincerely hope their
I would hope so too.
relationships are with people that are not your wife.
Hmm.
But there may be insights that they can glean from your experience, nonetheless.
Yeah, definitely. So when I say that the only thing we disagree on is because there's so many things that we have that are shared values.
Mm-hmm.
Like treating everyone fairly. Just everyone's being equal on an equal playing field, right? But there's going to be some people also that don't feel that way, especially about like the LGBTQ community, right? So if there's like a major disagreement on something like that, that would make more of a red flag for me than someone just believing that the universe was created by a divine being. But when it comes to those conversations, if you wanted to start with something in a street epistemology style, you can say something like, what gives your life meaning and purpose? as opposed
Hmm.
to saying, why do you believe in myths? Right? Because if you come at it with like an attacking type of question when you're saying like, why do you believe in myths? It's just going to poo-poo it off like, oh no, they just believe in myths. And, the person's going to get really angry about that, because a lot of people, their beliefs are part of them, right? Like they actually internalize their beliefs. And the last thing you want to do is cause the backfire effect, which is when somebody digs down even further on their beliefs because they're being threatened. So if you start off with a question like, what gives your life meaning and purpose? And they say, well, my family gives me my life and or gives me my meaning and purpose, then you're kind of avoiding the religious question altogether when it comes to that, right? And then you can ask them about like, well, I know that you are also a Christian, so how does that fit into your outlook on life, right? And then a lot of times they'll say, well, I go to church because it's for the community. A lot of people will say it's for the community. It's
Hmm.
for, someone asking how your father's doing, how your back is, after your surgery, that type of thing.
And I have to say, in my experience, that's one, maybe the one, but certainly one area where religious communities are superior to the humanist communities
Yeah.
that I've been a
Oh,
part of.
definitely.
Is that building of community and I hear you're sick. Here's a casserole. Let me take your kids
Yeah.
for an afternoon or something like that.
Yeah, and I think part of the thing, and you've brought this up before when you've done your talks and stuff too, is about like the funding that these organizations, the religious organizations, get from, they have like the tax-free status, they have the ability to get money funding from the archdiocese or whatever it is that it's coming from, and the congregation, and as a humanist community, we are trying to replicate that with things like Sunday Assembly and Oasis groups and things like that, but we just haven't got to that level yet. But yeah, so when it comes to having the discussions and talking about religion, and getting back to the part where I was saying, you can ask what part of religion helps you in your daily life, and I've even had people say to me like, you're going to hell, and I'll say something along the lines of, well, how do you know that? And they say, well, it says it in the Bible, right? And then I say, well, would an all-loving God send someone to an eternal punishment? Right. And it's just, you can have these conversations where you're asking questions gently, and you're maintaining a calm demeanor. You're not, getting angry and lashing back out at them. Even if they're angry, right? You're going to keep your voice low. You're going to stay in a calm state, and it's just you're going to try and have them mimic or mirror the way that you're having a conversation. And I've just found these conversations to be very, very fruitful. One thing that you can do too as an interfaith couple is you can have a chart of positives and negatives to having an interfaith relationship. So when I did that with Cindy, she actually put that one of the negatives is that she doesn't feel like she can be as much of a Christian as she wants to. So I'm like, okay, well, now that I know that, how is it that you want to be more of a Christian? And she goes, well, I'd like to go to church once in a while. Like, okay, well, then you can go to church, and that's fine, right? And she'll be like, oh, and like once in a while I want to take the kids to church. Like, okay, that's fine. They can. It's part of the best practices for raising free thinkers is actually immersing them in different religions so they can understand the stories and understand why it is that people believe what they believe. Because if you keep kids out of a church for like their entire life, and then they hear about all this magical things that go on inside this building, and they have never seen on the inside of it, later in life they may be curious to go and check it out, right? So like the more information they have up front, the better. But the 9
Yeah.
best practices was actually written by Dale McGowan. He wrote it in Parenting Beyond Belief. And the 9 best practices for raising free thinkers is kind of one of those tools that I use on a daily basis to just influence my kids to make their own choices and to be free thinkers. Because one of the things is not putting a label on them. So you wouldn't say my kid is a Toronto Maple Leafs child or a Detroit Red Wings child, right? So why would you say they're an atheist child or a humanist child or a Christian child? Like, just leave them unlabeled, and then if they have
Right.
this label that they have placed on them, they're not going to know how to live up to it because they don't even know where they're coming from.
Yeah,
And I
they're
feel
the
like,
children of Christian parents, maybe, or Muslim or
right,
Hindu parents, but they're not Hindu, Muslim, Christian children yet.
right,
They
right,
should make
because
up their own minds.
yeah, for sure. And if you've ever spoken to someone who is a Christian, and you say, well, why are you a Christian? Like, I don't know, my parents were Christian, so I guess I'm just Christian. right?
Yeah,
And it's
I
like
mean,
they have
the
no
greatest
idea.
predictor of someone's faith is their parents. The second greatest predictor of someone's faith is their spouse.
Yeah, yeah, right. So it's like, if someone is had this label placed on them and they can't defend it, then it's going to crumble, right? Because they haven't built the foundation. Whereas, like,
Mhm.
you or I have done a lot of thought into this, and we've kind of built our foundation brick by brick. We've put our own foundation together, so we're standing on pretty solid footing. And I feel like that's what I want for my kids, regardless of what belief system they end up in. And I think just from the way that we're raising them, I think that if they do pick a belief system, not that you really can pick your beliefs because you're either convinced or you're not, but whatever they fall into, I believe that they're going to be, on the empathetic, compassionate side of it.
Yeah, if we can instill that, then it's values, not the specific beliefs. Or we like to. One of the things I'm trying to do with Podcast for Inquiry is to demonstrate how to think, not and
Yeah,
not try to instruct on what to think about any particular issue, but to demonstrate what genuine curiosity looks like on an issue, and to entertain an idea that you might not agree with, so that you can understand it. And only at that point do you evaluate and decide whether you agree or disagree, or what you think or feel about a particular issue.
right, exactly. And I don't know if what your stance is on this, but I've come across a lot of people who are religious that also kind of claim to be humanist because they follow the principles of humanism over their dogma. So, like, my
Mhm.
wife considers herself to be a Christian humanist. So she still wants to believe in the divine that also lives by the principles of humanism. And I've come across a few people that are Islamic that are the same way.
Yeah, I have friends that, I mean, they wouldn't necessarily describe themselves as humanists, but we share the same values. And where one of my best friends has become a fairly practicing Muslim. He prays multiple times a day,
Hmm.
but he's also completely open to, say, equal marriage, even though that's against Islam. He just thinks that's where Islam got it wrong.
Right.
And his humanistic principles, he doesn't describe it that way. He just thinks that that's just obviously the right thing. But I'm going to describe them as humanistic principles.
Yeah.
His care and his empathy for his fellow human beings
Hmm.
overrides what the Quran, or what his imams say is right or wrong. He
Right.
trusts his own sense of right or wrong far more than the religious tenets that dictate what they should be.
Yeah.
I consider him to be, I mean, as I said, he's one of my best friends. I consider him a highly moral person. And I guess the way you describe your relationship with your wife, we do have a very different perspective on the existence of, or the nature of, a supreme being. But that has almost zero impact on our
Right.
friendship, except when he needs to stop a conversation to go and pray for a few minutes,
Right.
which which is fine, right?
Yeah.
That's not an issue.
Right.
I
And if it
wanted to,
makes them a better person because they feel like that's making them a better person, then,
yeah,
all the power to them. Right. So,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Now, I want to come back to meaning and purpose, and I'm going to quote, because you write about this in your book a little bit,
Hmm.
and you wrote, "When people talk about meaning or purpose, they usually refer to something larger, something that exists in the grand scheme of life here on Earth. They often believe that they have a destiny, a plan laid out before them, a path that they must follow." And I've known many people like that, and it also sounds like the plot of just about every movie I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'd like you to expand a little bit about on what people are why that is so emotionally resonant
Hmm.
for many people, why that is so important to be a part of a much grander tapestry, and why you seem to be a pretty happy guy, completely lacking of that perspective.
Right. Well, you've had Phil Zuckerman on the show, so we kind of understand where, like, morality comes from, right? Just evolution, and how there's just changes in allele frequency over time within our DNA that enables us to take on the characteristics from the groups that survive. And the groups that survive, always had to have, not always, but like the ones that survived were usually the ones that were working together in larger groups and tribes. So we kind of have that mentality still. We haven't really evolved beyond that point where we are community seekers. We want to be part of something bigger or larger, and we want to think that something is out there looking after us. Either it's the tribe elders, or just a higher power, a higher being. And I think that is a driving force behind a lot of why people are religious still, or have spiritual, in quotation marks, thoughts. Right? Like there's a girl named Britt Hartley who's talking now about no nonsense spirituality, where she's saying that a lot of people now, instead of going down the nihilistic route where they're saying like nothing has meaning, they're turning to spirituality. I'm going to keep doing quotation marks because I don't know what that actually means. Very, very ill defined. But there are a lot of things people will say like, I don't believe in God, but I'm very spiritual. Or I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, right? And a lot of times people are looking for something that's higher than them, and a lot of times people will say humanity is higher than me. Like I'm doing this, like my purpose is for the greater good of humanity, or
Yeah, I
Earth,
mean,
or whatever, right?
most pro social actions are for things created. Like one
Yeah,
of the it's the old person who plants a tree whose shade he or she will never sit in.
right.
Right,
Yeah,
you're doing that for the next generation. People
yeah.
devote themselves to charities or to non-governmental organizations, or they're activists, not if not for personal glory. There may be some that do that, but the vast majority that do so because they want to be a part of something greater than themselves. I mean, you're
Yeah,
part of the Canadian Armed Forces, and a large number of people that serve in armed forces around the world do so out of a desire to be a part of something greater than themselves.
yeah,
And again, there may be a religious aspect in some people's motivations, but a lot of it is just sort of a secular view, or a non-religious, non-sectarian view of wanting to contribute to the commons, to the greater good, as you said.
yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of communities, like I said too, that we're building as humanists, right? Like Sunday Assembly. I'm currently the president in exile from Sunday Assembly Detroit. Just because the way that things are going right now with the USA, and
Mm-hmm.
not being able to travel over there.
And it's precisely because of people like you that we need to curb foreign influence.
Yeah. So, and just part of being part of recovering from religion as well, and offering
Mhm.
support to those who are struggling with their beliefs, and
Right.
their lack of beliefs, and
And that
finding
was the
different.
topic of our first conversation. If you want to
Yeah.
learn more about Steve's work and about recovering from religion, look into our archives, and we talk about that at length.
Yeah, definitely. But organizations like that, and just being a part of these organizations, also helps provide meaning and purpose for people, because I had to overcome my angry atheist phase and get into a comfortable life now, where I do have a community, I do have family and friends that support me, and just providing that to the next group of people that's coming up behind us. It's like sending the elevator back down once you've reached the top.
Yeah. We mentioned about you serve in the Canadian Armed Forces, and you wrote in your book about your experience, one of your experiences with that. And I'll just quote you briefly. I jumped for joy when I found out that Remembrance Day's ceremonies were slated to begin. Were slated to start being genuinely inclusive in 2023. So can you tell me what was it like in 2022? What was and before, what was supposed to change in 2023, and what actually happened?
Yeah, so I always noticed during a lot of ceremonies, whether it's Remembrance Day or anything really that's to do with memorials, or just celebrations in general, a lot of people want to put their own spin on it. So whoever's organizing it seems to want to put whatever their religious denomination spin on things, and they always seem to have like priests or imams or ministers come up and give like a benediction. They usually do prayers where everyone's expected to bow their heads and nod along or whatever. And I noticed that during Remembrance Day ceremonies that there's a lot of soldiers who were not Christian but pretty much
Hmm.
every single celebration or memorial that we have for veterans is all about Christianity. And in 2023, I heard from, there was actually an article posted about how the chaplaincy program within the Canadian Armed Forces was, accepting humanist chaplains. And then we have the very first humanist chaplain, Marie-Claire Cadiz, which you've had on your show,
Hmm.
and spoken to her. But she was part of um, she was the very first humanist chaplain. And there was a letter that came down saying that 2023 it's going to be more inclusive. We're going to try and speak for more people than we have in previous years. So I was like, oh wow, that's amazing. Like I actually kind of shed tears of joy to say, like, this is so amazing that the people who fought and died and were maimed for our country and other countries, they're going to be represented. And I was severely disappointed when I got there. And instead of making it more inclusive, they actually, with extreme prejudice, started saying how, that we were trying to take away God from them and tried to remove religion from their ceremonies and things. And that wasn't the goal. The goal was just to try and, make it a bit more inclusive so that people who didn't believe in that specific deity could also be there and join in on the moment of silence without prayer and that type of thing.
So that's a good example, I guess, of the backfire effect that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's like they really took it as a threat to their belief system. And I think that sometimes when you have privilege in society, like if your religion has been privileged over others, then inclusivity or giving up a piece of the pie just feels like a loss. It feels like an attack.
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess if I get like if you and I are business partners, um, but I get 75% of the profits and you get 25%, and we're both doing the same amount of work, and then you say, well, it should be equal. In a sense, you're right from a moral perspective.
Hmm.
We're putting an equal amount of work. We should share equally in the proceeds. But I am losing something. I'm only going to get 50% of the proceeds from now
Right.
on, whereas I have unfairly been getting 75% previously. So if everything is always Christian, and now we have to acknowledge the existence of other faiths and those that don't have any, that is a loss of prestige, or at
Yeah.
least a loss of, um, um, I guess, of privilege, of just it being, it's no longer the default or the assumed faith. We have to actually make it explicit that in addition to Christians,
Hmm.
there are also Hindus and Muslims and
Right.
Wiccans and Jews and atheists and.
Yeah, and it's extremely hard for them as well, because the Bible explicitly states that only through Jesus you can be saved, right? So they
Most
don't want
faiths
to.
have a kind of exclusivity clause that way, don't
Right.
they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's more of an inoculation so that you don't try and jump ship, right? It's like
Hmm.
saying like, well, you have to believe this so you can get into heaven or get to the reward. But I feel like that's part of it, right? That they're feeling like, oh shoot, now we have to allow these people who are not going to be saved to be part of this ceremony, and I think it internally feels like that. And I think it's because that it's been preached for so many years that the other is the bad guy, right? Like
Hmm.
there's no like us, it's always us versus them. And I think that that's part of the narrative that we have to try and get rid of, because like you said, we can agree with people on certain things and not on other things. And I think this is one of those spaces where if people have fought and died under different religious beliefs or no religious belief, those people should be honored as well.
Yeah. One of the things that we have in common, we're both parents, and I think probably something that we've also had in common are many conversations about, well, if you're not raising your children uh, in a belief system, in a faith of some kind, this isn't
Mm-hmm.
an evangelical attempt, right? But if you don't, if you're not grounding them in some sort of faith tradition, how are they going to be moral? What is going to be their ethical foundation? And you wrote in your book that you were driving around one day and you saw a billboard that read, "Fathers who know Jesus know best." And your comment was a couple of pages later was, it would appear that they have a hard time recognizing the complexity of parenting. So can you talk about about even today the fairly commonly held belief that you need religion, particularly within children, for an ethical grounding, and what your experience has been doing your best to raise freethinkers.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a really big topic, and I think that a sign like that is just it's asking for trouble, because there's a lot of people that would drive by that sign and get very angry at that, and I think there's actually a lot of Christian people who would probably see a sign like that and kind of do like an eyebrow twitch or something, right? Because it's a very harsh thing to say, that fathers who know Jesus know best. First of all, was Jesus a father? I don't know. And like, unless they consider, the Trinity, where he's himself, the Father and the Son, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I guess they're talking about from like his principle standpoint. There's some questionable things, but also, there was some things that, if you can attribute them to Jesus, they were good things to follow, I guess. And I do mention in the book that, if you're able to use Jesus' teachings to help you be a better parent, then that's cool. But there's also a lot of us that don't, right? And there's a lot of us that, like we talked about with the evolution and just the changes in allele frequency over time, in people who are showing compassion towards their family and their tribe. Those character traits are going to pass on to the next generation, and you're going to raise your children to have those same characteristics, whether they believe in a deity or not, right? Like, you're just going to instill the values that you think are important to getting along, being a valuable member of society. And I kind of finished the chapter off by saying that, the sign should say something more along the lines of that parents who try their best are the best parents for their children, because that's pretty much what we're trying to do, is do our best. And like Maya
Mm-hmm.
Angelou always said, you do your best until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better.
Right. Yeah. I sometimes I sometimes want to apologize to my eldest child. I think of him as the first pancake. The first pancake is always underdone or burned, right? I was a first time parent. I didn't really know what I was doing, right?
Yeah.
And I look back and, I would be a better parent now
Hmm.
to him than I was then, because I have learned so much over the course of parenting four kids.
Right.
And I'm not done yet, uh, uh, yeah, I think you're right. I did the best that I could at the time when I basically didn't know anything. And looking back, I've now been a parent for over 2 decades, and I have learned a lot, and I have changed.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things that jumped out at me when I read it in your book, because I was kind of surprised to read something that we have in common. You wrote that these mythic tales, though often cast aside as mere folklore, contain seeds of humanism grounded in universal truths that continue to resonate with us today, regardless of belief. And I really do think that that's true. I mean, I read to my kids the Greek myths, the Roman myths, the Japanese myths,
Yeah.
German, Norse, Christian, and Jewish and Muslim myths, and indigenous myths, and blended them all together. I didn't give any particular things, because
Yeah.
these really do form the stories and narratives and structures of our societies, flow from these stories that we have told ourselves for centuries or millennia. And they are important in that sense, not because they tell the literal truth about the origin or structure of the universe, but because they indicate things about ourselves as humans. And you know, and I think that they are essential for cultural literacy
Hmm.
as well, and to read that. That's obviously a principle that you hold dear, and you mentioned earlier that you let your kids go to church, and I live next door to a Catholic church, and we'd be walking by on Sunday mornings, and we could hear the choir singing. So my boys asked if they could go in. I said, so we did. We went in, and
Right.
they heard the music, and then the singing was over, and the priest came up to the microphone and started talking, and my kids started getting antsy. I was like, Dad, can we go? It's like,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, we can. And so, but I think you're right. Like I think you used the word inoculation,
Hmm.
and I think that that's actually a very good metaphor. These, religion should not be a new idea to our children,
Right.
right? Even if we're raising them as non-believers or as freethinkers,
Right.
uh, because they're going to have religious friends,
Yeah.
and some of them, and someone in their social circle will say, "You should believe as I do,"
Right.
and ideally, they won't be completely new ideas when they have that conversation for the first time.
Yeah, and it happens too at, like, college or university. Someone's going through a really tough week, and someone comes up to
Mm-hmm.
them and says, "Well, you know what you need? You need Jesus." Right?
Right.
And if they already know who Jesus is, then they'll be like, "Yeah, no, I already know who Jesus is. Thanks." Like,
Yeah.
instead of like, "What? What's that? Who's this? What is that?" And then they'll get curious about it and potentially go and then be duped because they hadn't heard anything about it before, right? And they didn't have the ability to hear all the stories and know the different narratives that we've come up as human beings. It's almost like humans wrote the stories. I don't know what you think, but
It seems to me that that's the common thread between them all. Yes.
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about broader pictures, because you do talk a lot about your family and your kids, which I think is entirely appropriate. But there are also some broader themes that you broach in your book. Um, and one of the things that, again, something that really jumped off the page for me was when you wrote, "Our society has made it shameful not to know the answers to any and all questions, and this needs to stop."
Hmm.
So, talk about that a little bit, and how we can make the answer, "I don't know," socially acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, we're living in kind of a social media society right now. So a lot of times people will, see a lot of articles that pop up, and they don't read the entire article. They just read the clickbaity headline. And it never seems to be that there's anything that's unanswerable. So if someone has a question about something, they type it into Google, and usually it'll pop up with some type of answer. Another thing that happens too is if you're sitting in school and a teacher says, like, Chris, what's the answer to this question? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Okay, well, you're wrong. I'm going to move on to so and so. Well, no, they weren't wrong. They just didn't know the answer. So they said they don't know, which is actually a legitimate answer to that question. And I think that the important thing is like, let's teach the person if there's an answer to that question. And if there isn't an answer to the question, then it should be, I don't know, is the most reasonable and honest answer that we can give. When you think about how many things that we know for a fact in this world, it's very slim compared to the things that are unknown and maybe even unknowable. We just don't know. And I think that it's just an important thing to admit that we don't know things. And I think that one thing that religion kind of gets wrong is that they pretend to know all the answers. So it's really easy to fact check them when it comes to, if someone has like a phone in their pocket, to be able to go, well, the minister said this, I'm just going to double check. Oh, no, that's incorrect. We know what this is through, investigation and the scientific method. Right. So, I think it's just important for people to, if they don't know something, to just come out and say, I don't know. It's the most honest answer you can give. And when I do that with my kids, I say, I don't know, but maybe we can Google the answer, or maybe we can find it together.
Yeah, I think that's actually the best follow up is, "I don't know, but let's find out."
Yeah.
Like that's great. Let's see if we can figure this out.
Hmm.
And okay, I've been fascinated with the concept of free will for a long time. I basically just assumed that free will was a thing, like
Yeah.
that we had it, right. That's a default assumption in our society, and I never questioned it until I was at a conference, Imagine No Religion, in Toronto about 8.5 years ago, and I heard Julian Mussolino speak. And free will was almost a secondary topic. He was talking mostly about restorative versus punitive justice, and
Oh,
how awful our prison system was. But part of that was was a theme that free will is compelling, but an illusion nonetheless. And it planted a seed that I wrestled with for years. And I had two guests, one of whom was Julian Mussolino, on the topic of free will. One who says that Julian saying that free will is an illusion, and then another guest who said that we do have free will, and it's granted to us by evolution. That was with Kevin Mitchell. And then you wrote in your book that you write, I am a soft determinist. I think all the actions, situations, and influences you've had in your life have led you to this moment. And so, of course, I want to know, what is a soft determinist? Does free will exist? Okay, that's fine. That's I think a defensible position. Is free will an illusion? Also a defensible position. But a soft determinist, I'm like, I don't know what you meant by that. So now that I've got the author of the book in front of me, I didn't understand something you wrote. Please explain that to me.
Yep, I would love to. I'm just about to run out of battery, so I'm going to, if we can just cut here just for a second and maybe do some editing. I just got to plug in the computer. 1 second.
Not a problem.
That was really dumb of me. I unplugged it when I was thinking about moving to a different location. I never plugged it back in. So I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
We'll get back into it. So soft determinism, and this is just a term that I don't know if I've created it or if it's come from somewhere else before. But when I think of determinism, I think for the most part, I think that's true. I think that things are determined by, all of the things that have come before us, right? Like when you look into the research and everything, they're saying, that things were set off from the beginning, and then, things have just continued and will continue to go in the same direction. But I think that when it comes to the free will debate and argument, I think that because other people who are also determined to do things, I don't know, and this is where philosophy is a little bit hazy for me, but their actions against you, with it being determined on their side, is it determined on our side how we're going to react to those things, not having the determination from the beginning of our start and the beginning of their start, where we collide? Is there free will in that, right? Because I can't, whatever started me off when it comes, it's really, this is where the philosophy is really hard, right? But wherever we started off, so say we're born and our life is taking a certain path because it's all determined from the beginning, and then someone else's life is started and determined from the beginning, but then we intertwine at some point, and that intertwinement is that also determined? Is everything that we're going to interact with or about determined, or is that where we actually have the ability to make a different choice because of the influence that they have on us? So I'm just thinking that maybe there's some influence, some outside influence outside of the determined line that we're in. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess you've had certain interactions. I mean, I come away changed from almost every interaction that I have because I learned something, right? We were talking about parenting, right? I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. I've learned new things. I've gained new skills. But did I have a choice about that? Right. Or given the fact that I had a kid, of course I was going to do my best to take care of that child as best I could. And then when I had another, what did I really need to have 4? Well, given other circumstances, right? I would have had only 2 children or none at all. Right. So, I think the argument for determinism isn't like absent external influences. Of course, we interact with the outside world, and our interactions with the outside world change who we are, which means we're going to react differently to the same situation, or potentially act differently to the same situation if we encounter it down the road. Doesn't sound to me like you're a soft determinist. Sounds to me like you're a determinist. I'm
Mentally,
still.
yeah. I want to leave some wiggle room because I just don't know, like, if we were to go back in time and one thing was altered,
Mhm.
if we would have continued down the same path. Because if we wouldn't have, then it can't be determined, and there's got to be some type of wiggle room there. But I understand what you're saying. I agree. I would consider myself to be a determinist, but I like to leave a little bit of wiggle room just in case.
It's
Just
more comforting that way.
it's not even the comforting thing. It's just I don't want to claim to know anything to 100% certainty. So I
Okay.
would say that I leave some wiggle room in there just to because I could be wrong, and I think that um, maybe things could change and could be different, but we don't know because we only live this one life.
All right.
Um,
So
yeah, I
go
heard
ahead.
some really cool theory recently where they're saying that the universe, the Big Bang is just the start of this universe, and it potentially came from a previous universe who maybe like it imploded and exploded or whatever happened. But they're saying that if time is eternal, and if the universe or cosmos is eternal, then there's going to be the exact same makeup that we see today in this iteration of the cosmos is
Hmm.
going to occur again
Hmm.
infinitely, infinitely, right? So we're going to live the same life over and over and over and over and over again because all of the same genetic material will be in the same genetic makeup that we have right now. And if that's the case, and if your mind is a combination of the cells that make up your brain and synapses, and they're all going to be the same, then maybe we will live again in the same life. We just won't know that we've lived previously in the same life. I just thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I have highlighted um, several of the aspects of your book that I liked best. I have no idea if they are the ones that you liked best. So I want to give you the chance, as the author of the book, is there an anecdote or yeah, an idea that you've written in your book that we haven't talked about today that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, it depends on if you want me to cry on screen or not, because
That's entirely up to you. You're certainly welcome to.
my favorite part that I've actually included is the story about my son asking the blind man a question,
Okay, please tell
because
us.
yeah, it's just kind of goes to show the empathy and compassion that kids have at a young age to just include everyone and be part of humanity. So we were at a street fair and we saw a guy with this big stick just banging it on the side of the road. And both of my kids were like, "What is that stick? Like, why is he banging that?" Like, well, he's blind, so that's the way he's kind of using to get around. And my son said, "Oh, like echolocation." I'm like, "Yeah, I guess so. Like, I think so. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but he's able to feel around." And they said, "We want to ask him a question." And I'm like, "Okay, let's go ask him a question." So I tapped him on the shoulder. I'm like, "Excuse me, sir, my son has a question for you." And he said, "Ask away." And then so Connor, who was like 3 at the time, maybe close to 4, clasped his hands together like this, and he goes, "What's your favorite bird?" And I'm thinking, like, why would you ask a blind person what their favorite bird is? Like, he probably doesn't even know what birds are. Like, I mean, he knows what they are, but like, he's probably never seen one before, right? Like, how would he know the difference between each bird? He probably hears the tweets and stuff, but I just didn't know. And he said, "No one's ever asked me that question before." And he got down on his knees, right in his face, and he pulled up his sleeve, and he had this amazing tattoo of a phoenix.
Oh wow!
And he said, "The phoenix is my favorite bird because, like me, it's risen from the ashes." And his wife, the tears were pouring down her face. I was crying. He was crying, and it was just like a beautiful moment between strangers, just to know that my kids had asked this guy who they'd never seen before this question about a bird, and he happened to have this tattoo. And he, even as he was walking away, he said, like, "Oh, that made my day." And it's just amazing that humanity is like this sometimes, where we see the greatness that humans can accomplish when we're just kind to each other.
That's very touching. Thank you, Steve, for sharing. Um, I think it's a perfect note to end on. So, Steve Ghikadis, author of Humanism from the Heart: Building Bridges Beyond Belief. I'm sure everyone will want to get a copy of this book. How can we do so?
Yeah, so if you want to try and wait for a free copy, so on Amazon for the ebooks, I put it out every 3 months. I try and put it out for free for a week. If you want to buy a paperback copy, a lot of people like to have paperbacks for their shelf. You can get it on Amazon or any bookstore, Barnes and Noble, Indigo Chapters, pretty much any of the local bookstores in the Windsor, Essex area. Also, you can ask for it in libraries and they'll bring it in because they're able to bring it in the libraries, and then you don't have to pay a cent for it. You can just check it out and read it.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you for coming back onto Podcast for Inquiry. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again. It's been great.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review and showing your support at patreon.com/podcastforinquiry. Email us podcast@centerforinquiry.ca. We'd love to hear your perspective. The Podcast for Inquiry is brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada. We are a national educational charity supporting reason, compassion, and secular values. Help us support rational discourse and evidence-based decision-making by becoming a member at centerforinquiry.ca/join. CFIC is on the web, on Facebook, and you can follow us on Blue Sky at CFI Canada. Podcast for Inquiry is produced and edited by Zach Dumont and Martin Zielinski. Music by Anthony Lazaro. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblatt. See you next time.